What's up guys, it's me, Jeremy. The patch 6.2 notes are out, and with a bunch of direct changes to champions and other things, come a bunch of hidden or indirect changes as a result. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you don't enjoy the video, please click the dislike. And if this video hits, let's say 12,000 ratings, I'll make another one of these for the next patch. As well, I've partnered with ProGuides.com for the editing on this video. I've personally been using them to start learning Twisted Fate. And they have a free trial that gets you full access, so you can check it out and decide for yourself if you like it or not. Anyways, let's get started. So the first hidden or indirect buff is a little bit quirky, but I think it's one that will be underrated by a lot of people. And it's a buff to champions that have long-ranged channel abilities. This is going to be stuff like Varus with his Q, Xerath with his ultimate, and so on. The reason for this is because you will now be able to cast trinkets while channeling an ability. More specifically, casting the blue trinket while channeling those kinds of abilities will be really helpful in a lot more situations than you might expect, since you suddenly have a reliable way to see into the fog of war when trying to snipe someone down. But just keep in mind that this change will be broken for both Xerath and Jhin specifically at the start of the patch, so it will take a little bit until it is fixed for this change to have an effect on those champions specifically. The next group of champions who received an indirect buff are junglers who have a weak early game. In this patch, Dr. Mundo, Elise, and Kindred all received reasonably sized nerfs, and all three of them were junglers who had an incredibly strong early game and could easily take advantage of junglers who were weak early on. And because of the nerfs, they're also likely to be played less, which gives a bit of a leg up to junglers weak in the early game, since you'll now be a little bit more likely to get an easier matchup and be able to survive to level 6. Although this change also affects the other junglers a tiny bit as well, it's much more impactful to those who really struggled to just survive the early game, since those three champions that got nerfed was a key group of bad matchups for them. Another group of champions who received an indirect buff are any champions who use a keystone mastery that isn't Thunderlord's Decree. This one's a little self-explanatory since Thunderlords is receiving a pretty sizable nerf. The champions that never used it in the first place get a little bit of a leg up, since their opponents who were or still are using Thunderlords are now a little bit weaker as a result of the nerf of the mastery. Also receiving an indirect buff are the utility mages. Due to the reasonable buffs on Morellas and Athenes, those champions who built those items, generally utility mages, now have an easier time getting cooldown reduction and mana regeneration that their kits crave so heavily. When these items were weak, it was pretty hard to itemize for 40 or 45% cooldown reduction, but now with these changes, there should be no problem for a mage to hit that cap and really max out on their utility. And the next one I think is pretty interesting, and it's mobile fighters in the top lane that have good trades and sustain, so stuff like Aurelia and maybe Riven. And this one occurs as a result of the massive buff to AP Nunu that is taking place on this patch. Because of the buff, top lane Nunu is likely going to become a lot more popular, maybe even a highly contested pick. And these mobile fighters that have enough sustain, or in Riven's case shields, to keep up with Nunu's poke do really well against him in lane. Nunu only has one damaging ability outside of his ultimate, so his laning power comes from the targeted poke that he gets from his snowball leading to some free damage, and the nice sustain that he gets from his consume. But the sustain on those fighters contradicts the poke, and the mobility lets them be the aggressors in the lane, since Nunu will have a hard time kiting and disengaging against them because of their mobility. As for how good and how popular Nunu top will be, well, it's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely going to be more than it was in the last patch. The last change in this list is, it's not an indirect buff in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it's a very direct buff to Cassiopeia. And although it kind of goes against the spirit of this video, I wanted to include it anyways because it's something that is likely to go fairly unnoticed, because it was included in the rather minor and unappreciated bug fix section of the patch notes. But for being included in such an insignificant way, I actually think it's the biggest direct buff of the entire patch. And the change is this. Similar to Rise, Cassiopeia now retains her previous movement or attack command after E Twin Fang's cast finishes. What this means is that you can click in one direction and cast Twin Fangs in any other direction, and you will automatically continue moving in that direction that you initially clicked on, essentially making kiting using her Twin Fangs take pretty much zero mechanical skill now, whereas previously it took an incredibly high amount of mechanical skill. She's become much easier to play and thus much better overall from a seemingly minor bug fix. And that's just about all the hidden buffs I could come up with, so let's go over a rundown of some of the major things to look out for on this patch. The buffs to Nunu and Cassiopeia are pretty significant, as is the nerf to Rengar. The Kha'Zix buff is also something that I could see having a lot of potential since it adds a lot of mechanical ability into his kit, so maybe it's like a wildcard buff from the patch. As well, jungle matchups are probably going to shift around a little bit since 3 major popular junglers took a hit, but Graves wasn't touched, so he'll still reign supreme. However, there's a big opportunity for a lot of the Devourer-based junglers to be a little bit better now. Udyr, Shyvana, Master Yi, Aatrox are all already pretty strong, and now they won't have to compete as much in the early game either to just farm up their Devourer. Nunu jungle also has a little bit of potential to rise up, but his buffs benefit his laning a lot more than his jungling. And make sure to keep in mind that the way wall collision works has been changed a little bit, so flashing and warding over walls will be a little bit different and might take some getting used to. And of course, look out for everyone trying out the new Shen and Jhin, or maybe even give them a shot yourself. I certainly had some fun trying them out on the PBE. And that's just about it. Here are some of my favorite comments from a previous video where I asked what your favorite thing about the Mordekaiser rework was. For a chance to be featured in a future video, leave a comment about what your favorite change in patch 6.2 is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.